How could one drunk confession destroy a whole life? Why did my honesty become the weapon that ended my marriage? I thought telling the truth would fix the guilt, show him I cared enough to admit it. Instead, my husband's silence turned into something colder than hate. I'm Lydia Corvin, 34, an interior decorator, a mother, and, according to everyone now, a cheater who ruined her own marriage. People talk about me like I'm some heartless woman who threw everything away for fun. But that's not what happened. I made one mistake, one night that shouldn't have meant anything. I was at a reunion with old friends, and my ex, Julian, was there. We drank too much, talked about old times, and things got blurry. I woke up sick with regret, and the first thing I did was tell my husband, Daniel, the truth. I thought that would count for something. That honesty would mean I still respected him, still valued what we had. When I told him, he just stared at me. He didn't yell or throw anything. He just said, "Thank you for telling me," and walked out. That silence was worse than any anger could have been. I spent the whole day waiting for him to come back and say something, anything, but when he did, he acted polite. Too polite. I tried to explain that it didn't mean anything, that I was drunk, that it was just a stupid accident. He said, "You don't accidentally break vows." Since that day, everything between us has been quiet and cold. He moved into the guest room. We still eat together, still share the same space, but it feels like living with a stranger. I keep telling myself that I did the right thing by confessing, that lying would have been worse. But sometimes, when he walks past me without even looking, I wonder if maybe telling the truth wasn't about honesty at all. Maybe it was just me trying to wash the guilt off myself and letting him carry the stain instead. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The morning after I told him, I woke to the sound of the shower running. For a second, I thought things were normal again, that Daniel would come downstairs, kiss my forehead, and make his usual dry joke about how slow I was in the mornings. But when he came out, dressed in his grey shirt and dark slacks, he didn't even look at me. He just said he'd be late coming home and walked out. I sat in bed for a long time, staring at the empty space beside me. The confession had felt cleansing at first, like tearing off a bandage, but now it just felt like an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I told myself I had done it for the right reasons. Everyone says honesty is better than deceit, right? I just wanted to prove I wasn't like other women who hide things. At work, I kept glancing at my phone. No messages. I finally texted him around noon. "Are you okay?" He didn't reply. I sent another. "We need to talk tonight." Nothing. By the time I got home, the silence in the house felt heavier. His jacket was on the hook, his shoes by the door, but he wasn't in the living room. I found him in the guest room, sitting at the desk, staring at his laptop. I stood there awkwardly and asked if we could talk. He said, "We already did." I told him he was being unfair, that I was trying to fix things. He said quietly, "You can't fix something by admitting you broke it on purpose." I wanted to scream at him. I said it wasn't on purpose, that I was drunk, that Julian had been persistent, that I didn't even know what I was doing. He asked, "Did you say no?" I froze. He looked at me, expressionless, and said, "That's what I thought." Then he turned back to his screen. I hated how calm he was. I wanted a fight, tears, anything that showed he still cared. I told him it wasn't fair that he got to sit there pretending to be the victim while I was the one being honest. He said, "You're not honest. You're guilty." That night, he didn't eat dinner. I sat alone, picking at cold pasta while the clock ticked. I thought about calling Julian, just to talk, just to remind myself that someone once wanted me, but I didn't. Even I knew that would be too much. When Daniel finally came downstairs to get water, I said, "We can go to therapy. Couples do that." He said, Couples who still have a foundation do that. I told him he was being dramatic, that I wasn't the only one at fault. He said, "Who else was there?" I didn't answer. He walked back upstairs, and the sound of the guest room door closing felt like a verdict. Over the next few days, I tried everything. I cooked his favorite meals, left notes on his coffee mug, sent him links to articles about forgiveness. He didn't respond to any of it. One evening, when he came home late, I asked where he'd been. He said, "Working." I asked with who. He said, "People who still respect me." I laughed bitterly. "So now you're the saint," I said. "You've never made a mistake." He said, "I never made one that took my marriage with it." I told him he was punishing me for being truthful. He said, "No, I'm punishing myself for trusting you." After he went upstairs, I poured myself a glass of wine, then another. I stared at my phone again. Julian's name sat near the top of my contacts list, waiting. I typed a message. He won't even talk to me, then deleted it. I hated how weak I felt. Around midnight, I heard a sound from the guest room, a faint click, like a drawer closing. I walked quietly down the hall. The door was cracked, and through the gap I saw Daniel sitting at the desk again, typing. He had papers spread out neatly, a small notebook beside him. He looked calm. Too calm. I said, "You're still up?" He didn't turn around. "Working," he said again. I asked if he was writing about me. He said, "About what happened?" I laughed. "You're keeping a diary now?" He said, "No, I'm keeping records." I didn't know what that meant. I asked, "For what?" He said, "You'll see." I wanted to push him, to demand answers, but something in his voice made me stop. I went back to bed and stared at the ceiling until dawn. The next morning, he left early again. On the kitchen counter, there was his coffee mug, cleaned and placed upside down on the drying rack. A small note rested beside it. "Appointment downtown. Back later." I told myself it was work-related, but a cold feeling sat in my chest. That afternoon, my sister Clara called. She asked if the rumors were true. I asked what rumors. She said someone had told her Daniel was seeking advice. I said, "What kind of advice?" She said she didn't know, just that he'd been asking questions about next steps. I told her she was being paranoid. She said, "So you really cheated on him?" I said yes, but that it wasn't like that I told him right away because I wanted to save our marriage. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "Sometimes the truth isn't a gift, Lydia. It's a weapon." That made me angry. I said she was supposed to be on my side. She said, "You told him for yourself, not for him." Then she hung up. When Daniel came home that night, I tried to sound casual. I asked if his appointment went well. He said yes. I asked what it was for. He said, "Organization." I said, "You've been really organized lately. Should I be worried?" He looked at me for a long time before saying, "Maybe you should start thinking about that." Then he walked away. Later, when I was cleaning the living room, I found a small folder tucked behind the couch cushion. It was labeled Household. I opened it. Inside were copies of bills, photos of our house, even a list of furniture and appliances. I put it back quickly, my hands shaking. At dinner, he ate quietly, scrolling on his phone. I asked if he wanted to talk. He said, "Not yet." I said, "You can't just shut me out forever." He said, "Forever started the day you told me." When I reached for his hand, he pulled it away. I said, "Daniel, please, can we start over?" He said, "You already did. With him." Then he stood, placed his plate in the sink, and went upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard the faint hum of the printer again, papers sliding out one by one. The sound didn't stop for a long time. The next few days passed in a strange sort of quiet. Daniel went to work early and came home late, always calm, always polite. He didn't yell, didn't accuse. That made it worse. Every silence felt like a punishment I couldn't measure. I tried to act normal, cooking dinner, cleaning, pretending nothing had changed, but even the clatter of dishes felt too loud beside him. One night I asked if we could talk again. He looked up from his laptop and said, "About what?" I said, "About us." He said, "There's no us right now. There's you and there's what you did." His voice wasn't cruel. It was steady, which somehow hurt more. I told him I missed the way he used to hold me. He said, "You should have thought of that before." I said I had been drunk, that it was a mistake, that people make mistakes. He said, "You don't make that kind of mistake by accident." I tried to laugh, said he sounded like a judge. He said quietly, "Maybe it's time someone is." That was the first night he slept with his phone under his pillow. The next morning, I saw a small sticky note on the fridge with a list: mortgage, utilities, school fees. All underlined. I asked if he was budgeting. He said, "Something like that." I asked if I could help. He said, "No, it's better if things are clear." That word, clear, hung in my mind all day. At work, I couldn't focus. My colleague, Marta, noticed. She asked if I was okay. I told her Daniel and I were going through something, but that we'd be fine. She said, "He came by the office today." I blinked. "Here?" I asked. She nodded. "He asked about your schedule." My stomach dropped. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe he just wanted to surprise me. But when I got home, he didn't mention it. I asked how his day was. He said, "Productive." I said, "Mine too." He didn't ask what I did. That night, while he was in the shower, his phone lit up on the nightstand. I didn't mean to look, but the preview caught my eye. Calendar reminder, downtown 10:15. No name, no details. I lay awake after he fell asleep, listening to his steady breathing. It was strange, how calm he seemed, like a man who had already made peace with something. The following evening, Clara called again. She said Daniel had spoken to their cousin, who worked in finance, about asset separation. I said that was ridiculous. She said, "You should take this seriously." I told her to stop being dramatic, that Daniel wasn't the type to do something drastic. She said, "No, he's the type who does things quietly." When Daniel came home that night, I tried to lighten the mood. I opened a bottle of wine, set the table, made his favorite pasta. He walked in, looked at the candles and said, "What's this?" I said, "Dinner. A truce." He said, "A truce implies we're still at war." I told him he was being cold, that he couldn't keep treating me like I was invisible. He said, "You wanted honesty. This is mine." We ate mostly in silence. When I reached for his hand, he didn't move it away this time, but he didn't return the touch either. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed. It was Julian. I hadn't heard from him since the confession. The message was short. He knows, doesn't he? I quickly turned my phone face down. Daniel looked at me and said, "Who's that?" I said, "Marta, from work." He nodded slowly and said, "You're a terrible liar now." I said, "I'm not lying." He said, "Then show me." I froze. He stood up, picked up my phone, and glanced at the screen. He didn't even unlock it, just saw the name. He said, "So, you're still in touch?" I said, "He texted me first." He said, "Of course he did, they always do." Then he walked away, calm as ever. I wanted to scream. I followed him to the guest room and said, "You can't keep punishing me for being honest." He said, "Honest? You didn't confess for me. You confessed because you couldn't stand the guilt." He shut the door, and I stood there, shaking. Later that night, I sat on the couch scrolling through old photos, vacations, birthdays, our wedding. I wanted to feel something other than shame. When I reached the pictures from the reunion, I saw Julian's arm around me, my smile too wide, my eyes bright with something that looked like freedom. I hated myself for missing that version of me. The next morning, Daniel was already gone again. On the counter, a new note. School run handled. Dinner. Don't wait up. His handwriting looked almost gentle. I tried to distract myself by calling my mother. She said, "What did you expect him to do, Lydia? Kiss your forehead and say thank you?" I said, "I expected him to forgive me." She sighed. "Forgiveness isn't owed, it's earned." That night, he came home late again, carrying a small bag. He said, "I'll be using the guest room for a while." I said, "You already have been." He said, "Now it's official." I laughed bitterly, said, "You sound like you're filing paperwork." He looked at me, calm and distant, and said, "I like things in order." The next day, I went to pick up Maya from school. She asked if Dad was mad at me. I said no, we were just having grown-up problems. She said, "He told my teacher he's the emergency contact now." My heart dropped. When I got home, I asked him about it. He said, "It's better this way. You've been distracted lately." I told him he was trying to make me feel like a bad mother. He said, "I don't need to. You already do." That night, I noticed something else. His laptop was always open now, always filled with neat spreadsheets and folders. One was labeled personal accounts. Another said documentation. I asked if it was for work. He said, "Everything's work now." The printer started humming again later that evening. Paper slid out one by one, slow and steady. I asked what he was printing. He said, "Just copies." I said, "Copies of what?" He said, "Of things that matter." He turned off the light, leaving me standing in the doorway. When I went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about how the truth, the thing I believed would save us, had become something else entirely. A weapon he could use against me, piece by piece, quietly, efficiently. At dawn, I heard the front door close. Through the window, I saw him walk to the car, his steps calm and even. He looked like a man who wasn't leaving but preparing to. When the sun rose, I checked my phone again. A new text from an unknown number appeared. Meeting confirmed. See you 10:15 downtown. My stomach twisted, the exact same time as before. I deleted it, but the dread stayed. For the first time, I realized Daniel wasn't lost in silence. He was building something beneath it, something final. By the end of that week, I started to feel like a stranger in my own house. Everything Daniel touched seemed too neat, too deliberate. His shoes were lined up perfectly by the door. His shirts hung evenly spaced in the closet. He labeled drawers that had never needed labels before, receipts, personal, household. It was like he was preparing for someone else to live there without him needing to explain where things were. On Friday morning, I asked if we could have dinner out. He said he already had plans. I said, "Since when do you have plans without me?" He said, "Since the night you did." The words hit harder than I expected. I tried to act unbothered, saying, "If this is your way of punishing me, congratulations, it's working." He said, "It's not punishment, it's adjustment." He left without another word, and the sound of the door closing felt final. I called Clara again. She said I needed to give him space. I told her space was all he had been taking. She said, "Then you should have thought about that before you went looking for attention elsewhere." I told her she was cruel. She said, "You want sympathy, but you caused the fire." Then she hung up. At work, I tried to lose myself in design sketches, but I couldn't focus. My phone buzzed every hour. Notifications, gossip, messages I didn't want to read. Someone from the reunion had told a friend what happened, and now the story was spreading. The version they told made it sound worse, like I'd been carrying on with Julian for months. I told myself Daniel wouldn't believe rumors, but when I got home, the look in his eyes told me he already had. He was sitting at the dining table, laptop open, paper spread out. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Sorting evidence." I laughed, said he sounded insane. He said, "It's better than pretending." I asked what he meant. He said, "Pretending we still have something." I told him I wasn't ready to give up. He said, "You gave up the moment you told me." I felt the words hit like a slap. "So I should have lied instead?" I asked. He said, "You should have cared enough not to need to lie." I said he was being cruel. He said, "Cruel would have been pretending to forgive you." He stood, picked up his papers, and walked toward the stairs. I followed him, saying he couldn't just rewrite her whole life because of one mistake. He stopped, looked back, and said, "You didn't make one mistake. You made one choice. Stop dressing it up." Then he closed the guest room door quietly behind him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, touching everything we'd bought together. Every frame, every shelf, felt like it was slipping away. When I passed by the guest room, I saw light seeping from under the door. I heard the soft sound of a printer again, that same steady rhythm. The next day, he said we needed to attend his mother's birthday dinner. I didn't want to go, but he said, "You owe her the respect of showing up." At the restaurant, his mother was polite, but her eyes were sharp. She asked how we were doing. I said, "Working through things." She smiled faintly and said, "Daniel always finishes what he starts." I didn't know how to take that. Halfway through dinner, I felt my phone buzz. It was Julian again. "We need to talk." I ignored it. Then another message came through. "If he's talking to people, I should warn you." My throat went dry. I slipped the phone into my bag, but when I looked up, Daniel was watching me. He said, "Do you need to take that?" I said, "It's work." He nodded and said, "Everything's work now, isn't it?" After dinner, as we walked to the car, his mother pulled me aside. She said softly, "He's calmer than I expected. That's when you should worry." I said, "You think he'll leave me?" She said, "No. He'll outthink you." I didn't reply. When we got home, I asked Daniel if we could start counseling. He said, "Counseling is for people who want to fix things. I'm organizing them." I asked what that meant. He said, "You'll see soon enough." On Sunday morning, Maya asked if her dad was mad at me. I said no. She said, "Then why doesn't he sit next to you anymore?" I didn't know what to say. Later that day, I heard her ask Daniel if we were still a family. He said, "Yes, just in a different shape." I confronted him after. I said he shouldn't say things like that to her. He said, "She deserves to know what's real." I said, "You're poisoning her against me." He said, "I don't need to. You've already done that." That afternoon, I went through the guest room when he was out. The folders were gone, replaced by one small, locked box. Beside it, a note sat on the desk. "Stop looking for things you don't want to find." I froze, staring at the handwriting. My chest felt tight. That evening, Clara called again. She said, "He's serious, Lyd." I asked what she meant. She said, "Daniel called Mom, said he's talking to someone about next steps." I said, "Next steps for what?" She said, "You know exactly what." I hung up and poured a drink, then another. I told myself he was bluffing, that he wouldn't actually go through with anything. He was too calm, too rational, but the calmness had turned into something else, distance wrapped in precision. Later that night, when he came home, he didn't look tired. He looked finished. I asked where he'd been. He said, "Downtown." I asked what for. He said, "Meetings." I said, "You say that like you're planning a war." He said, "Wars end faster when you prepare quietly." I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked. I asked, "What are you going to do, Daniel? Leave? Divorce? Take Maya?" He said, "I'm not going to do anything suddenly. I'll handle it properly." Then he turned, walked upstairs, and closed the door behind him. The next morning, he left early again. His note on the counter was different this time, shorter, sharper. "Be home by 6. We need to talk." The whole day, I couldn't think about anything else. At work, I stared at my reflection in the office window, wondering what I would look like if I were still the woman he loved. I practiced what I'd say, how I'd cry, how I'd make him remember. When I got home, the house smelled faintly of his cologne and paper. The printer was still warm. A neat stack of pages sat on the desk, face down. I didn't dare look. At exactly 6, the front door opened. He walked in, calm as ever. I said, "What's this about?" He said, "You'll find out soon." I asked, "Are you ending this?" He said, "It's already ended. I'm just formalizing it." He sat down, opened his notebook and began writing something. I asked, "Can we at least talk before you decide?" He said, "I've already decided. Now I'm making sure it's done properly." I stood there, speechless, as he wrote in clean, steady strokes, the pen scratching softly against the page. When he finished, he closed the notebook, looked up at me and said, "You should rest. Tomorrow will be busy." Then he stood, walked to the guest room and shut the door. The click of the latch was soft but final. It echoed in my head long after he was gone. By the end of that week, the tension in the house had changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic anymore. It was quiet, organized. Every move Daniel made felt deliberate. He'd started labeling drawers, sorting files, making lists. Even his side of the counter looked different, neat, almost sterile. I told myself it was his way of coping, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. He was preparing for something, I just didn't know what. Saturday morning, Clara came over unannounced. She said she'd tried calling, but I hadn't answered. I told her I was fine. She looked around the house and said, "It doesn't feel fine in here." I told her not to start. She said, "He's planning something, you can feel it." I said she was being dramatic again. She said, "No, you're being blind." We sat at the kitchen table in silence. She finally asked if I'd heard from Julian. I said no, though that wasn't true. He'd texted me twice, both times saying he wanted to talk. I deleted them without replying. Clara said, "You should stay away from him. You've done enough damage." I said, "You make it sound like I murdered someone." She looked at me sadly and said, "Sometimes it's not the body you kill, it's the trust." When she left, I felt angry at her pity. Everyone was treating me like a villain for one mistake. I poured myself another coffee and told myself Daniel would come around eventually. He had to. He wasn't the type to throw his life away over one bad night. That afternoon, he came home early. I tried to sound casual and said, "You're back quick." He said, "I had what I needed." I asked what that meant. He said, "Information." I laughed awkwardly. "You sound like a detective now." He said, "Maybe I am." I followed him down the hall, demanding to know what he was talking about. He said, "You don't get to know everything anymore." I said, "I'm your wife." He said, "You were." That word, were, hit harder than anything else. I tried to pull him back, told him we could still fix it, that couples survive worse things. He said, "Not when one of them keeps pretending it wasn't a choice." He went into the guest room and closed the door. I stood outside it for a long time listening. I heard the soft click of his pen, the rustle of paper, then nothing. Later that evening, Maya came into the kitchen holding her school art project. She asked if I could help her write her last name neatly. I said sure, and as she spelled it, she stopped and said, "Dad told me sometimes names change." I froze. "Why would he say that?" I asked. She shrugged. "He said some things change to stay right." I smiled, but my hands were shaking as I helped her finish. When Daniel came down for dinner, I confronted him. "Why are you talking to her about names?" I asked. He said, "I'm teaching her about truth." I said, "She's 8. He said, "So she still knows the difference between a mistake and a lie." I snapped then. I said he was cruel, that he was trying to turn our daughter against me. He said, "You did that yourself." Maya started crying. I tried to calm her down, saying, "Mommy and Daddy are just talking." Daniel said, "We're not. We're finally listening." Then he walked upstairs, leaving me holding our daughter, shaking. That night, after I tucked her in, I went to the garage for air. The smell of dust and old paint filled the space. His car keys weren't on the hook. I noticed a box on the workbench, one of those plastic storage bins. Inside were folders labeled neatly: finances, household, records. Another one said Maya. I picked it up, But before I could open it, the garage door creaked. He was standing there, calm, holding a mug. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. I said, "What is all this?" He said, "Things I don't want lost." I said, "You're scaring me." He said, "No, I'm protecting myself." I asked, "From me?" He didn't answer. He just sipped his coffee, watching me. Then he said, "Don't touch those boxes again." I wanted to argue, but something in his voice made me stop. I stepped back and said, "You're really going to destroy everything over one mistake?" He said, "No, I'm finishing what you started." Then he left me there, the garage door closing slowly behind him. The next morning, I called my mother. I told her everything, about the boxes, about the notes, about how calm he was. She sighed. "He's done, Lydia," she said. "He's planning the end." I said she didn't understand, that he wouldn't really leave. She said, "He already left. He's just doing it neatly." I cried after she hung up. I wanted to believe she was wrong. I wanted to believe Daniel still loved me, even beneath the silence. That evening, I made dinner again, hoping maybe this time he'd talk. When he came home, he looked tired but peaceful. We sat across from each other in silence. I said, "Can we please start trying again? For Maya?" He said, "Trying stopped when you stopped being honest." I said, "I was honest. I told you everything." He said, "You told me just enough to feel clean, not enough to make it right." He stood, rinsed his plate, and walked toward the hallway. I followed him. "You can't just keep living like this," I said. "It's not fair." He turned, looking at me for a long moment. "You're right," he said. "That's why I'm changing it. Properly." Then he walked into the guest room and closed the door. The word properly echoed in my head. He'd said it before, but this time it felt heavier, final. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The air in the house felt different again, like it was holding its breath. Around midnight, I heard the faint hum of the printer. Pages sliding out, slow and steady. I got up, walked down the hallway, and stopped outside his door. The light under it glowed faintly. I raised my hand to knock, but then I heard him speaking softly on the phone. "Yes," he said, "I'll bring everything tomorrow. She doesn't know yet." I froze. My throat went dry. I backed away quietly, heart pounding. Back in the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking. The words kept looping in my mind. She doesn't know yet. I didn't sleep at all. At sunrise, I went to the kitchen. The house was spotless again, every surface wiped clean. On the counter, there was a note. His handwriting was calm as ever. "Going downtown this morning. Don't wait up." Under it, his coffee mug sat perfectly in place, clean, dry, and turned upside down. It was like a ritual now, a signal. And I finally understood. Whatever was coming, it wouldn't be another argument or another night of silence. Daniel wasn't preparing to talk. He was preparing to end something, carefully, calmly, and properly. That morning felt too still. Even the clock seemed quieter. I waited for Daniel to come home, rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd apologize again, how I'd make him see that I was still his wife. That one mistake shouldn't erase everything. When his car finally pulled into the driveway, I tried to smile. He walked in, carrying a folder, his face unreadable. I asked where he'd been. He said, "Downtown." I asked, "For work?" He said, "For closure." I laughed nervously, said, "You're being cryptic again." He just nodded. After dinner, I followed him into the guest room. The boxes were gone. Only his laptop and one small stack of papers remained. I asked, "Did you move everything?" He said, "I organized it." I said, "Organized what?" He said, "My life." I told him he was scaring me. He said, "You should be scared of what you became, not of me." I started crying then, telling him I didn't want to lose him, that I was sorry, that I'd do anything. He said, "You always say sorry when the damage is permanent." I sat on the floor beside him, pleading. "Can't we try? For Maya?" He looked at me and said, "I'm doing this for Maya. She deserves peace." I said, "You can't just walk away from a family." He said, "You walked first." That silence afterward was so sharp it almost hummed. I stood up, wiped my face, and said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Handle it properly." Those words made my stomach twist. He didn't sound angry, just calm, resolved, like someone who'd already chosen a new future. I tried to touch his arm, but he stepped back. "Don't," he said. "It's already set." When he turned off the desk lamp, I noticed the faint glow from the printer again. Pages slid out slowly, one after another, like a clock counting down. I whispered, "Daniel, please talk to me." He said, "I've said everything I needed." Then he left the room without another word. The hum of the printer filled the silence. I stood there alone, staring at the papers piling up, cold, neat, and final. I didn't know what they were, but I knew what they meant. Something was coming, and this time, it wouldn't be a conversation or another night apart. It would be the end, done the way he always did everything, quietly, cleanly, and properly. I saw him again 2 days later, in the courthouse lobby. I hadn't even known he'd be there. I'd come because Clara told me he was finalizing something, and I thought I could stop it if I showed up. I wore the blue dress he used to like, thinking maybe he'd see me and remember the good things. He was standing by the front desk, calm as ever, holding a folder. When he saw me, he didn't look surprised. He just said, "You shouldn't be here." I said, "We can fix this, Daniel." He said, "No, you already told the truth. Now it has to mean something." Before I could answer, a woman in a grey suit walked up and asked my name. When I said it, she handed me an envelope. The sound of the paper crackling seemed too loud in the marble hall. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched. I opened it right there, hands trembling. The first words hit me like a blow. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Below it, another line. Temporary custody arrangement for minor child. I looked up at him, shaking my head. "You can't do this," I whispered. He said, "I already did." People nearby had stopped to look. A clerk called another name over the speaker, but all I could hear was the echo of his voice, steady, final. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He turned to leave, walking past me without a glance. As he reached the door, he said softly, "This is the only truth that matters now." The papers trembled in my hands. Around me, the courthouse buzzed with other lives, other endings. I stood there frozen, realizing that honesty hadn't saved me. It had signed my goodbye. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.